Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today for another Lackawanna Pastimes program. I'm Sarah Piccini, the Assistant Director of the Lackawanna Historical Society, and today we're joined by some of our friends from the Everhart Museum in Scranton. We'll be talking today about Away from Home, the Everhart's current exhibit focusing on the Indian residential and boarding schools. The exhibit will be up on display through August 15th, so you still have a few weeks to join in. Today we'll start with a brief video from the Everhart's Executive Director, Kathy Johnson, and then I'll turn the program over to Kim Crafton, the Everhart's Interim Director of Folkart, as well as Frank LittleBear, a musician, artist, and author who is part of the Cree Nation. We'll be talking a bit about the boarding school process itself.
Welcome to the Everhart and our presentation of Away from Home, American Indian Boarding School Stories. This exhibition is made possible by the NEH On the Road, a special initiative of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is adapted from the Heard Museum exhibition Away from Home, American Indian Boarding School Stories, curated by Janet Cantley, and made possible by generous support provided in memory of Alice Brownfleet, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust. One of the most important aspects of this exhibition is its focus on the Carlisle School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This boarding school has great significance to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but also to our larger and greater history of our nation. Secretary of the Interior, Deborah Haaland, has asked us to shed light on this difficult aspect of our national heritage and national history. She herself has heard many stories of what the Carlisle School for her grandmother. And so it is very important that we all consider through empathy and understanding what it was like to have one's own history, culture, language taken away. We now need to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And through this exhibition, whether it's the shedding light on Carlisle or the many other boarding schools in North America, it is time that we understood what happened and celebrate the Native American Indigenous peoples. So within this exhibition, there are many difficult stories that we have to take to heart and process and understand and have great empathy. From the children's shackles that we see to the stories of assault and rape, and also the stories of food insecurity, disease, sadness. And so in showing this work, we hope that we can create another dialogue about who we are and what kind of citizens that we want to be. So one of our most important national heroes, Jim Thorpe, was also from this area. Jim Thorpe is well known for his running and in track and field at the Olympics, and his perseverance and tenacity, even when he didn't have shoes that matched, showed who he was and where he came from, that he was not going to give up despite all obstacles. We are very proud to showcase his story in this exhibition as well. The Everhart Museum is proud to host this exhibition. We have a long history of showcasing our own collections on First Nations people, and we hope to do more in the future. Thank you for joining us.
In there, there's a brief overview there of the exhibit. The exhibit will be open through August 15th. So if you have a chance, please go up and take a look at the rest of it. It's definitely a story that needs to be told. Fits nicely into some of the Everhart's existing collections. It is a traveling exhibit, so a slightly different tale than is usually focused on. So I'll turn the program over now to Kim and to Frank to talk a little bit more about how the exhibit came to Scranton, the process of making it, and what we're hoping to gain from having this exhibit in Scranton. So take it away, Kim.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm really excited to be here. Again, my name is Kimberly Crafton, and I have been a longtime friend and compatriot of the Lackawanna Historical Society, and very, very pleased to be here today as the interim folk and traditional art coordinator at the Everhart Museum. During the time that this exhibition was being erected, and it was brought into town by the National Endowment of the Humanities, during the time that it was being prepared for presentation and the opening ceremony that we were planning, it was found in Canada, a burial ground of hundreds of Native children. Remains had been found near one of the boarding schools. And in a few days after that, others. And in the weeks after that, more and more, until, as Johnson mentioned in her video, we have been asked by the Secretary of the Interior to begin an investigation of the boarding schools across the United States and the role that they played and the role that our government played in their existence, in their founding, and what role do we now, as she mentioned, as citizens have in rectifying and, first of all, hearing, second of all, comprehending, and lastly, rectifying our joint relationship. And we do need to hear these stories. And so it's wonderful to have, as difficult as the stories are, this exhibit available for us to go and see and begin to understand, to hear, and to think about how do we respond. We have a very strong role in this because not only are these stories, these are families, these are stories of multi-generational trauma that exists to this day. This is not a long ago history. These are, our friends, our own relatives, whose immediate family members are people whose stories continue in this vein as recipients of the legacy of the boarding schools in the United States. So we're really pleased to have with us today to help us understand and begin to open the doors to let a little light into this story, Frank LittleBear, who is a longtime friend, also one of the preeminent Native American cultural educators, certainly in our region, but across the country as well. He is of the Cree Nation and has spent his entire life devoted to educating people about the living culture, the living history, the role not only in the past, but what role do people of Indigenous heritage play in helping us find a better foot forward. And he has always been extremely educated in what has happened in our past, but incredibly devoted to where do our next footsteps together lie. And so we're really pleased to have him with us to help us navigate these difficult stories and take us through into a better understanding. Frank, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully. All right. Yeah, I'm in a public park, so just want to make sure. And Kim, yeah, thank you. And thank you to the Historical Society for giving us an opportunity to share my point of view and insight on our culture. And as Kim stated, my focus has always been through my performances and lectures, and the things I've done for over 25 years, believe it or not, have been always focusing on the living culture, all the positive aspects of things, the things that really, really make our culture shine as Indigenous people, to make ourselves really, pop, to get people to kind of come together to understand in an aspect of not only education, but our living history, that this is a way of life of our people. This isn't a hobby. This isn't something we do on a weekend. We don't dress up in leather and beads and go to a powwow and, beat a piece of rawhide and scream at each other while we jump around a circle, just for, kicks. Of course, that could be fun. I don't know. But, seriously, it's been, and even with my nation's history, I mean, we go back hundreds of thousands of years, which, now the timeline is starting to sort of catch up with that science and other anthropology and archaeology, Smithsonian Museum, New York Institute of Higher Education. They're doing all these outreach programs throughout the US and Canada and these, group coalitions to say, hey, we need to really reevaluate the essence of humanity, where the origin cultures come from. And we all have them. some of us are very set in our ways with that. And there have even things that I've found, it's really hard to accept, really hard to say, well, I was brought up understanding this. I was brought up learning this way. So this must be the only way. I must be right for that, or my family must be right for that. And then you come to that realization, that sort of, driving at 3 a.m. in the morning on the road, that idea pops in your head that, hey, you know what, maybe there is a different perspective. Maybe there is something to that. A bell kind of goes off. But, this exhibit specifically, I think, and like most things, and as in the Historical Society, we live in a generation where we definitely want to shed light on things of our past, both good and bad, and open up strong dialogue. And for our Indigenous communities, one of the things that we always and often struggle with, both on and off the reservation, and for those of you that may not know me, some of my backstory, I'm the 5th generation born out of our territory. So all of my family actually lives in different areas. Some of my immediate family, and I have cousins and family that still live up on in the territory of the Sweetgrass Reserve. So what's really cool though is the aspect of connection, no matter what level that you're at, to always be reconnected and to be involved and get involved, to learn dance, to be accepting of the choices that you have in that connection and how important that is. And when we look at this aspect of our history, the residential schools, we look at society in almost two ways. There was a system of individuals that came here that from a different land that claimed that they already had ownership of a territory that we knew they've never stepped foot in before. Talking about hierarchies that now stated that they had ownership of this. And again, that we never traded for, never had an agreement with. And some of our tribes, mine especially, we kind of marveled at this in a sense of, well, maybe we should just, hear them out. If nothing else, they may step their ego aside and we may open up a new form of commerce or trade. Or at the end of the day, maybe we'll just have a great war battle and call it a day, who knows. But, that was one of the things that the individuals coming to your territory, it's like someone coming in your house and saying, you know what, you've taken care of this pretty well, but I don't think you're living to the best of your ability, at least not to my standards. And I think that I need to change everything in your environment because of that. And, oh, by the way, we're going to start really at the family unit. If you step back for a minute and you kind of think of how that would affect you, especially long term, you're gonna have to ask yourself, what if the roles were reversed, right? If I had to live through that, if I had somebody who I never met before decide to come in and claim that they had ownership of everything around me, that all my ways for hundreds and hundreds of years are completely wrong, and that the way that I'm raising my children and the way that we live, what we eat, all these things are completely wrong, and they have a better way. They're going to change it whether we like it or not. How would you kind of feel about that? And thinking long term, I mean, what most people don't realize is with the residential school programs, I mean, these have been going on since the early 1800s, for hundreds and hundreds of years, that either through the religious organizations that have come through the different churches and stuff, and even through the legislations through the governments, both on the United States and Canada, have put in act this movement to what they considered, actually, I wrote this down because I thought this was kind of funny. It's in one of my notes. Was the Indian Civilization Act that was founded in 1819, March 3rd. And the Indian Civilization Act was kind of interesting because it was sort of the proclamation that said, well, we've tried everything else to convert and change these people. So what's the next step? Well, it's forced education. So it's forced proclamation of taking the children away from them if they won't change their ways. We've already sort of put some of these people, locked them in their territories or the reservation. So now we're going to remove their children, force them to go to these schools and separate them in another sense. Now, As the exhibit showed, there's a lot of individuals, a lot of stories in that, personal stories, as well as just overall views of things that happen. In Canada, there was about 130 some odd residential schools and over 150,000 Indigenous children that were removed from their territories and families. Some of the most heartbreaking stories that when I worked on a project called Hidden from History was from about 1863 to all the way up to about 1998. This process was going on. The process that they used, the format that they used, the key components of people that were in position of power to dictate to the parliaments on how to break the Indian spirit were individuals that were very narrow-sighted and very prefixed on hating our culture entirely and finding it or annihilated from its very existence. So as they went through this process, you know, and mind you, I mean, that's one thing we have to sort of keep in mind. You know, a lot of people say, well, why didn't you rebel? Why didn't you guys fight back harder? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, and we'll get to that in just a little bit, but because I think that's also part of the psychology of this, just from a more of a cultural standpoint of Indigenous people. But, you know, they had people, where is it? Sorry. You know, they had people in, you know, the Bureau of Indian Affairs that they had, Indian Affairs Coalition that they had different things and different individuals that were, again, fighting working with legislation and church groups and different churches to find different ways to annihilate the Native American spirit altogether. And whether it was by force, you know, or by cohesion, they did just that. When a lot of those people came to the residential schools, the process that they went through is that brothers and sisters, oftentimes the family members never knew that their other family member was attending the classroom right next door to them. So, I mean, think about that. You know, you go to a school and you're completely isolated so much that you don't even know if your own family member's there. You're very separated, you're very in seclusion. And that one glimpse, that one time that you do get to see your sister, your brother, older, younger, whatever, as you sort of pass the hall, and if they're older, they've already kind of known from the process, you don't make eye contact, you don't communicate, you don't even wave, you don't do that. There was accounts of children that saw a family member and they ran to them. They said, oh, you know, thankfully somebody's here because this has been such a foreign experience, such a scary experience. And they get beat for it. They get their rations taken away. They get punished just for making those communications, making those connections with their family member. You know, this is a reality of things that people, children especially, went through. They could not speak their own language, you know, in these schools. They could not practice their own way. They couldn't talk about their own culture. They couldn't talk about things back home. They couldn't talk about their family members. These were all things. I'm flying around here, a little windy today. These are all things that literally, truly helped you get beat, you know, in that environment. You know, the shackles that were there, you know, cutting your hair. To our people, you know, your hair is part of an extension of your spirit. Most people don't realize, you know, our beautiful braids and stuff that we have when we grow our hair long. For my people, as you grow from the earth, you give back to the earth. So you grow your hair long, it's part of reconnection. It's an extension of your spirit, of your family. The times that you cut it, or either through ceremony, depending on your society or clan, if family member passes, you would cut or burn the ends of it. You know, there's really deep ritual meaning in what our hair stands for. So then you're taken from your home, you're put in an environment. So hair's got to go. We're going to take your clothes. We're going to burn all those. We're going to wash you down with lye soap and scrub you really, really good. Maybe lighten that skin a little bit if your tan's just a little too dark. You know, do all these things that, you know, make you realize, well, wait, you know, like why do you not like what I am right now? You know, a lot of it, again, it goes back to the system itself. You know, why was the system put in place? You know, there was a forced Assimilation Act, forced process of, taking a people of a different ethnicity, culture, belief system that just wanted to live free, raise their families in the best environment that they had, remove them from that, and because they wanted to have a better system. My grandfather used to actually joke about this. He said, before the white man got here, he goes, a man used to be able to get up in the morning. We used to go hunting all day, fishing all day, bring things home, to the village and stuff, skin, hang around fire and stuff, cook, hang out with our families, and get up the next morning and do it all day. Then the white man shows up and says, no, you can't do that all day. You got to go to work. And we're like, we thought that was work. So they said, yeah, we're going to make your life so much better. So now you're going to work the 9-to-5 job, climb up a big giant 100-story building and work on steel all day or something like that. I don't know who had it better. I joke a lot about these things because if you look at it, it does seem kind of like I can't believe it moments, and you guys know, as you start finding things about history and you start looking at things, you start realizing, like, did humanity really stoop to that level? Did we really hate a species of human being to the point where we wanted to exterminate them? And unfortunately, since the 1600s, that was exactly what we went through. A lot of our nations, and this is one of the other things, a lot of our nations that most people don't also realize within our culture is we didn't have an aspect of lying. We didn't have an aspect of deceit in our culture. We weren't at what we thought a naive people. Early on, we took people at their word. Your word, you always put your actions behind. The term, person speaks with forked tongue, became very popular because a lot of it was, when a person did start to lie, we realized they have two meanings behind everything that they say. And we learned a lot of the settlers, a lot of the colonists that came here, they did do just that. Part of it was out of fear for their own survival. Part of it was out of fear because they didn't know what we were going to do to them. We spoke a different language, ran around in animal skins all day. And the closest thing that they could relate to us was the Vikings that they're, that invaded England and stuff, years ago. And they all know how that turned out. So, so there was these different aspects that they were trying to find a way to coexist. And I think that was also part of the issue. There was a language barrier that we all had to also overcome. We had an aspect of, again, you always put your actions behind your words. If you said you were going to do something, you do it. If you traded for something as a gift, it was genuinely a gift. The most important thing to remember about what brought down the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee Confederacy was the fact that the French and British realized that if they showed favoritism to one of the 6 nations, they would start to internally fight, because that was part of their bragging rights. That's what made them strong. It was their unification in the fact that we're all family. We have the great laws of peace, but we also have the system that, of equality through our clan mothers and through our ceremonies that give us the right that everyone has an equal voice. We're all represented from the different houses during ceremonies, during times of, change of things like that. And if you traded with one, you had to figure out a way to make sure that it was fair to trade with everyone. We'd all have a discussion about it, and so on and so forth. But they found a way to figure out how to break that cycle. They figured, well, if we favored one, maybe we can get more, maybe we can get them on our side, and the others will start kind of getting jealous, and then they'll try to give us more, or they'll try to let us in more. They'll try to do something like that. So that was sort of one of the gateways that they started to find that sort of broke that wall, that 300-year wall that they had from doing the expansions across the Mississippi and out west. Once they learned that, then it was pretty easy, because they figured all the tribes, eventually all those savage people, probably all had the same sort of mindset. They valued their families very much. They valued where they came from. They were a little vain and naive in that regard, because they took everybody at their word. And if you said, again, you were going to do something, you were going to do it. And honestly, it was 738 different tribes at the time, and even still today, we had that aspect. So seeing how, because we weren't Catholic, we were considered pagans, we were considered savages, we were considered heathens, that we lived in the woods and our structures and homes weren't, I guess, up to code. The system of how we wanted to teach and share the things with our families and stuff wasn't in the norm with the change of society and the civilization. They wanted to come in and figure out a way to break that cycle. And the easiest way to do that was separating our children from their parents. And, they started in the early 1800s and they just kind of continued throughout. So think about how the residential schools are, right? So you have these areas that are popped up that are ran by individuals that may be very devout to their faith, or maybe representatives of a government parliament. And they put individuals in place to teach arithmetic, math, all the basic sciences and skills, and then also a trade job. You have certain rules and stuff that you'd have to follow every day. But one of the things they felt that would make you more adaptable in civilization and in society was you had to look like the person next to you. You had to make sure you wore the suit, you cut the hair, you spoke the language, all of these different things. It's estimated in the US, there's over about 350 boarding schools. I don't know how many of you guys might know that, but there's about 350 boarding schools. About 60,000 Indigenous children were taken off the reservations out of the territory. Majority of them were not cataloged. Okay, they were not documented. Many of them who did not write, they had a sign or symbol or something that they would use as their name. That was immediately wiped out. They gave them a Christian Anglo name or something to sort of fit where they were from. A lot of the names like Campbell, Smith, Branton, things like that actually came from either the generals or the colonialists that came through the area and set up shop to work trade with those people as they sort of traded through the different trading companies and territories there. But as they made it through these residential schools, they found that they weren't, again, allowed to speak their language. They couldn't practice their ceremony. They were not allowed to mingle with other family members. There were rules of beatings that they would have to do. And yet the individuals that were in charge of putting these things in place were the ones that wanted to kill the Indian spirit, wanted to kill us entirely because they wanted to change who we were. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure many of you probably have, General Richard Henry Pratt, famous general. And, he said, you want to kill the Indian in himself, but save the man. That was one of his famous proclamations that he ever said. And he meant that by any means necessary. Breaking the spirit of a culture through their family, through who they are, where they come from, is one of the most important things. And when you have a society of people or any nation, any culture really, that values family to the highest regard, in our earliest parts of history, we never attacked women and children. That was sort of the off limits. The men would go off to fight. Some of our women in our Plains nations had warrior societies too. But there was a mutual respect in that combat. We didn't take up scalping until the French showed us. That was actually something that the French gave us. They started scalping us, and we said, well, if you're going to do it to us, we're going to do it back to you. We took it a little further because we not only scalped them, but we took their scalps and hung them off of our cue sticks to show, hey, look what we did. And that sort of carried over. There was a lot of savagery. Sure, there was a lot of things that nowadays we look as barbaric, but I guess in times of war, you do what you have to make your stance and make your statement. But one of the most barbaric things that we've seen in society is the fact that, our children, our families were separated. That was sort of the thing that psychologically and emotionally has traumatized us generationally, even still today. You have families that have gone through the residential school programs that, out of everything they've ever been through, traditionalists are now hated by kids that have left because they go into an environment where they're encouraged to hate who and what they are, and they come back to the reserve bitter and angry because they were taken out of an environment that they were able to speak a language and get to know, the people around them. They were taken away from that in those most important times, and they've become disconnected with that because now they've had to change their entire way, and now they're sort of an outsider looking in, trying to find a connection or acceptance. So that's one aspect of it for those that are staying on the reservation and those who are removed from it. The boarding school systems and the residential school systems has always taught you that, your culturally, whatever is just wrong. That's one of the things, this is the faith you should follow. This is the direction you should go in. This is where you should be in life. This is how you're going to get there. You're not going to get there through this. So there's that trauma that a lot of them face. Coming back to the reservations, there's a very high alcohol abuse rate, very high drug abuse rate. Again, you're taking people out of what their normal environment is in a pivotal time of what their connection is to their family, their cousins, their uncles, and you're disconnecting them. And then when they come back and sort of throw them back in there, maybe later in life, they can't reconnect, but they're stuck there too because they can't leave the reserve anymore because they weren't given those skills. So they found a really great way to find different assets to take things away, but not reinforce or positively reinforce. This all on top of, and there's countless stories of this in residential schools where, boys and girls will, all the way up from, as early as 4 and 5, all the way up to, 16 through 20, were taken away, sexually assaulted, abused. Some were taken. There's, as we found with the 1505 in Canada, that there's a mass grave where they didn't have any markers, and it was literally by accident that they sort of found them, through an expansion. So, who are they? Where did they come from? Their bones are now being, repatriated back to their nations and their tribes, but they were forgotten. They were lost. Their grandparents or parents were told they ran away. They, they disappeared, or they didn't make it, or they died of some disease or some starvation or something like that. And no, you can't come up here. Which is another aspect of this. There were specific times when family could come and visit their children, and that was very far and few between, or times when the children were able to go back very structuredly and within a 24-hour period had to come back to the reserve. Depending on the residence school they went through, it could be years before that process happened. So you wouldn't see your children, and your children wouldn't see their families, for years on end. So, again, you start thinking and looking at the broader scope of this and the traumatic extensions that the Indigenous people, both in the US and Canada, faced because of this. Given its long history of people that were put in power, not to change or fix what they felt to give somebody a better life, but to sort of either re-educate or change the entire existence of that society because of something they had that they didn't. I don't know if we'll ever really come to the answer why, or just how big this problem is that we have to try to fix. I certainly think platforms like this are a stepping stone in that direction, because if we open up dialogue and we teach generations to come, we find different ways to rectify the problem, or hopefully not repeat them. Hopefully be able to see the injustice and the thing that is wrong within the community or the society or the mindset, and say, that's exactly where we don't want to go. That's the direction we need to veer from. And we need to have those open dialogues. We need to have people that don't cancel culture and don't deny, the aspects of dialogue, no matter how much it may upset them, because they're taking a stance that, well, this isn't what my faith has taught me we do, or this isn't what my culture has taught me we do. Unfortunately, it comes down to just the individuals. It's not a white, black, red, or yellow problem. It's not a Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist, indigenous problem. It comes down to how the individuals themselves decided to look at something they absolutely hated to their core, convince the other individuals around them that this is a way to fix that problem that we don't like, and move forward with that. Again, I mean, you think about it, in the US alone, 60,000 children, undocumented. We know about that number because of what was on the registries from some of the schools. There's something like 20 or so, 12 to 20,000 that just went through Carlisle. And I don't know how many of you have ever been there, but I know where I'm from, we're about 45 minutes from there. Some of the graves that you go through in there, and you wonder how, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds could perish like that. Yeah, some of them influenza, colds, typical stuff, but such a high number, such a high rate. Something that was very uncanny. There's investigations in different schools where there was a lot of children that were, it seemed that every week or every month, there was just a high rate of children that were dying from either starvation or malnutrition that went unchecked, and the individuals in charge were either removed from it and placed somewhere else, or decided to retire because people started asking too many questions. They were never punished. They were never asked, why did this happen? How could you let this happen on your watch? You were put in charge of it. You had brigadier generals that wanted, that were making statements at the time. People that were in charge of policies of, the Peace Act. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that. The peace policy that came through just around the 1860s, 1869, I believe. That was a proclamation of the Christian church that we would go into the reservations, and we would convince them that we need to have a residential school in their territory, or have them taken out of their territory and put in this, and learn about Christianity and learn about civilization, and become more modern and civilized. And there was high rates of death that happened there because the children rebelled in some way or did something that they thought they were doing right and they were doing wrong. In 1900s, I think there was like 20,000 that started in the US, 20,000 children that were taken from the reservations. Just to kind of give you guys a scope how fast this moved. So in about 1900s in the US, when the boarding schools started to open and started to really gain traction, there's something like 20,000 children that were taken. And when I say taken, I mean, some people, didn't they just have a policy for that? Didn't they just sign them up for that? They were legitimately taken. So you had two accounts of what you could do. So in the lower 48s here, we have something called the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Bureau of Indian Affairs are sort of like the government welfare system that they've given us for our reserves, our territories. If you've, one of the things that they do is they're supposed to provide us with subsidies, funding, and healthcare, food margin, stuff like that. Some of the Indian agencies that were put on reservations to oversee this, what we call the goon squads, they would kind of come over and they would knock you around if you were practicing ceremonies, trying to run off and do powwows. Any type of cultural events, believe it or not, were outlawed on the reservations up until the 1970s. We didn't, and we're not part of the Freedom of Religion Act until 1975, and it wasn't until 1979 they actually passed it through Congress to practice our ceremonies openly and publicly. Now, mind you, there were some cultural events that were going on, the Buffalo Bill Show, Wild Bill Show and stuff, Wild Bill Cody that was doing different shows and performances and stuff like that, and they were considered the freaks and oddities. But if you were practicing off the reserve, you could be arrested for it. You could face very hard punishments for it. The U.S. Marshals office, the United States Marshal Service, in their books, this was kind of funny. So I was down in Texas and we were doing a program. This was probably about early 2000s, maybe late 90s. So I was down there, and it was funny. The ranger that had me come down there was like, "Hey, you know about how with the Apaches that they're still outlaws of the United States." And we just kind of accepted over time. Yeah, they're on a reserve. The White Mountains are out there. They're fine, but we've never changed that law. They're still considered to be outlaws of the United States and could be arrested at any time. Okay, they live with that over their head every time. Now, so most of them look at it like it's a sense of pride. It's like, hey, I'm such a bad, whatever. What's interesting though is he showed me a document that it was current, I think up until the 1980s. 1981, it was finally revised, but it was January 16th, 1981, I believe. What was interesting was before that, if you killed an Indian man, it was not considered murder. You would just have to either pay a fine or get a reward bounty if you took a scalp for a man of $150. Okay. Female was 75, and a child was, depending on the age, was anywhere from 25 up to $50 or $75, depending on the age of the child. So 1980s. So again, you're dealing with a culture that we weren't looked at as human beings. And even still today, depending on where you go. And for those of you that don't know me, this may be your first introduction to the Frank LittleBear Show. So I'm a very politically incorrect person. Like, I grew up understanding, and being the 5th generation born off our reserve, I grew up learning about the things that make our culture fun and exciting, but also how hard it is to be and do what we do. My brothers, who are 12 years older than me, they thought I was crazy when I went into this profession, because they were like, they had a different upbringing than I did altogether. But I wanted to celebrate the heritage and culture and stuff. And I've been to areas where people look at you like, wow, you're going to walk on water because you're like native and in tune with nature and stuff like that. Or they try to spit on you because you're native and stuff like that. So it's sort of like the two things. But for me, I've always tried to, like I said, I've looked at these things in history. I've looked at, these wonderful things and found that, there's so many different aspects of people that want to annihilate and exterminate our people, just for being what we are. And the most important thing that we've ever had was our spirit, and was to keeping that going and to pass that on to the next generation, to show no matter what, we are a sense of pride. Out of the boarding school era, and through, the Indian Acts that they have done, we're the only civilization in the confines of the United States that have to prove our heritage with a card, or some sort of documentation of who and what you are. My grandmother left the territory when she was a child. When she was young, she left the territory. Or my great grandmother, she left the territory out there and moved across Canada from Saskatchewan all the way over, and then she settled up in Massachusetts area. And what was funny was everybody in their community, between Massachusetts and stuff, on my father's side of the family, between Pittsfield and Pittsfield, Massachusetts, it was a very predominant Irish Catholic area. So they move in, and they're having kids, and their kids are growing up, and then their kids are having kids, and generations are going by, and they're living on farms and helping each other out and doing stuff. And I remember my grandfather said that he always tried to pass himself off as a Black Irish because he was fairly dark skinned. So he worked for the railroad and things, but they always said they practice things in secrecy. When we did things, when we go up there as kids, we're always like out in the middle of nowhere, they were kind of showing us stuff and connecting us with their family. So long story short, my grandmother said this was really funny. She goes, there was one day we had a big picnic. We had all of our neighbors over. It was like April. And, we looked at them. We said, hey, we've watched our children grow. We've known our family for years. This is who we are. And this is what we've been doing. And, we're not Catholics. We're not this. We're not that. This is what we do. And we think we've entrusted you guys enough in our community to know that who we are. Hands started going up, and they started saying, "Oh, I'm this, I'm that. I'm Lakota Sioux. I'm, Narragansett. I'm, Muncie. I'm this, I'm that." And they're all looking at each other like, "Are you serious?" They've known each other for all these years, mainly because of those policies, mainly because of the fear. If you found out I was Indian at a time, that could change your whole perspective. It didn't matter. I pulled you out of a burning building. It didn't matter. I helped to watch or save your child out of a drowning pool. You found out something that you hated me so much, you could turn me in for. Oglala Reservation. People go in there and steal stuff from them all the time. They go into the reservations. They go into their homes. They steal stuff all the time. They're not looked at as human beings, as citizens. They report it, they do stuff, they may get to it. There's a high population that they found right now of murdered and missing Indigenous women and children throughout all of Indian country. They don't know if that's from the oil rigs, the oil companies that are coming in, it's kind of like the Wild West when you go on the reservations anymore. It's like they're under the federal government's outlook, but if somebody goes missing or is murdered, a federal agent, it's like, getting put on hold by your insurance company. We'll get back to you in a couple hours or 3 to 4 business days. We'll contact you back and discuss this. These are the things that still go on today. And we see it on TikTok and Facebook and social media and Instagram and stuff of these things. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for social media, most people probably wouldn't have known about the 1505 that they found. Because you didn't hear it on the typical news story until it finally started forcing its way out there. You had people that just simply wanted water years ago, remember? They sat out there and they just wanted clean water and they didn't want anything else. They just wanted to be heard that, hey, we're going to put this in, we want clean water. And sure enough, something broke.
And I think, Frank, you help us all so much when you take it to that level, that as just that level of empathy. We can't begin to hear the importance of words like injustice, of numbers like 20,000 children in a short period. We can't begin to hear any of that until we can put ourselves in the shoes immediately. In this is my family. Someone's coming in to tell me that I am offensive to them on the level of a, as you said, to negate everything that you are and to come. Right. And remove my children. If anyone could truly put themselves in that moment, you'd begin to understand the absolute helplessness, the generations of fear. And if then you begin to then internalize and step into each one of these stories that you are telling, then realize that they are not stories. They are brutal realities. And
absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things that is the most astonishing is the survival of all the different nations, B, the fact that there's any shred of looking for not conciliation, but just wanting to coexist is astonishing. So every word that you're giving to us is building a new way to try to understand this forward. And I want to make sure, Sarah, that we're respectful of everyone's time too, while still leaving time for some questions as well. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of be able to guide questions and answers and make sure your time goes the way you need it to.
Thank you, Kim. Frank, thank you for your comments. You used the phrase at the beginning about to reevaluate the essence of humanity. I liked that concept of a new way to look at populations that have historically been overlooked. So thank you again for your comments and your history. I see Jim Remsen has his little digital hand raised. So Jim, I'll turn it over for you if you have a question.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, thanks, folks, for organizing this. Very interesting. Yeah, 2 quick points. I used to work at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper for years, and the paper has locked onto the Carlisle story over the years and has a wonderful collection of very thoughtful, powerful stories about that over the last 10 years or so. And just this morning, they had a very moving photo story about the repatriation of some remains moved by caravan to the Dakotas. So I commend that to any of you if you maybe want to see some very fresh and very powerful visual images. It's I sent it to Mary Ann today, but it's I think you'll find it at inquirer.com, just to point that out. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Frank, I've been concerned about the issue of teaching about racism in the schools and the way folks are grabbing onto the CRT issue, and I feel like, perverting it and trying to short circuit any real thorough teaching of history. I'm concerned that it might actually bleed into historical societies and not just school districts. But I'm beyond that. Are you hearing that yourself? Are you hearing anybody raise objections to the negative stories that you're telling and how it might, be not something that should be taught, and try to sort of squelch it the way the CRT issue is being treated?
Well, I can say 2 points on that, and thank you for that question. I'm not a fan of the whole critical race theory. I will explain. Anytime that you take an aspect to where you have, say, 2 viewpoints, and you try to cancel one out to push a specific agenda, you wipe out the aspect of dialogue. If one person wants to own up to a conversation and just control how history went, and we all know the word history is his story. It came from the one person's point of view, but and as we all know, as historians and in the things that we do, that it has multiple facets. There's multiple points of view. We have to entertain those ideas, that ideology of dialogue, of looking at it from multiple perspectives. We can't just focus in on one point of view because we don't like somebody else's point of view anymore. So we want to completely say, well, you're crazy or you're racist or you're whatever because you just share a different, different political view or a different religious view or something like that. The other aspect of it is when we silence a voice when it comes to something we want to hear or something we don't want to hear, it also doesn't allow us the opportunity to get that sort of feeling of, do I support this or do I not support this? And I think that's also very, very important. I'm definitely a big fan of, if we're going to have free speech in this country, certainly respectful free speech. But if you have a viewpoint that is upsetting to someone else for some reason, it should be heard. And mainly because that too allows you that opportunity to say, yeah, that's the ideology of something that I don't want to follow. That also lets everybody in your community know, well, that guy's telling everybody to drink the Kool-Aid and maybe we shouldn't do that. We can't do that in a sense if one person just wants to control the dialogue, control the media, control the story and say, hey, this is certainly didn't happen. This is, look at the, those that are denying the Holocaust survivors, Auschwitz was not a summer camp, and there's people out there that don't, want to face the reality that actually happened. Think about all the people that perished in that. Their voice should be preserved. Their story should be investigated, just like this. We won't get there again if we cancel. We need to be open-minded. We need to be fair in that aspect. We need to respect each other. There's a lot of people I meet that definitely have different viewpoints than I do, especially culturally, because we come from a different tribe. It doesn't make my voice or their voice any more important or in the right. It just makes us equal in the fact we can share that dialogue. My people have one way of doing a rain dance, and the people in the Southwest have another way of doing the rain dance. Which one is right? Well, whichever one makes it rain the most, but at the end of the day, it's the fact that they both have the ceremony. The Navajo do it nude, we don't. So that is also a big change for that. But like I said, if we start kind of canceling that, there's actually a teacher down here in Youre County who spoke out against critical race theory being taught in school, because he was, a historian, and he liked the fact that anybody that walked into the classroom, he wanted you to have that thought process. Oh, I heard something that was upsetting, but at least I can voice that. At least I can talk about that. At least I can say, what my viewpoint is. So yeah, I think we need to have more platforms like that.
I didn't mean to turn this into a discussion about CRT. I think people misunderstand it often, and nobody's really teach it directly into the public school kids. What I meant is, are you hearing any white people say, why are you pushing so hard on this and trying to make us white people and my children be ashamed of our country?
Oh, well, I mean, okay. I probably did misunderstand your question then. So yeah, I'm not the I guess the type of Indian that, I use the term Indian anyway. I'm not the type to make anybody ashamed of who and what they come from. I don't sit there and say, oh, you need to apologize for what your people did to my people. There was a point in history where individuals did some awful things to other individuals. Today's a new day. We need to sort of, bring it full circle and realize what can we do to open dialogue and move forward with that. You should not be ashamed whether you're white, black, red, or yellow. You should know that you're not lesser of a person than the person next to you, and you certainly shouldn't try to delude another person for having a certain status or ability to get ahead in life. Everybody has those opportunities, those chances. I mean, look at me. I received a doctorate in Indigenous Studies and get to travel around doing what I do, mainly braiding my hair, wearing makeup, and dancing around on stage. And I love that. I love that aspect. I love the aspect of, wherever I go, those that want to make me feel lesser than what I am, I don't let them have that power, that opportunity. I have had, individuals that want to, call up and say, oh, I'm so sorry for something. And I'm like, did you hit my car? Did you run over my cat? Like, what did you do? And they're like, oh, for this, that, and the other thing. Look at your history. Look at what the Irish went through when they came to the United States back in, the Civil War era. Look what, we did in World War II with the Japanese. Look at the Scottish that were imprisoned. Look at, just all these things in history. I mean, all through history, we've all had atrocities that have happened to us. We're human beings at the end of the day. We now learn from these things. We don't need to silence them. We need to grow from them. We don't do that by making everything, I guess, political, or I guess getting, our feathers ruffled, and again, trying to make each other lesser than what we are, or apologizing every time we step out the door. And I guess what I'm trying to say is you can't fight racism with more racism, and discrimination. And it just seems certainly like the tables are turning when it comes to those things, which I don't think is fair. Like I said, we need to grow beyond a lot of this. So I hope that answers your question.
I see another question from Christine Zeich.
Yes.
Yes, hi, and thank you very much for the presentation. I have a specific question about the boarding schools. I wanted to know, and maybe I missed this in the presentation, I'm sorry. How long did they actually exist?
Let's see. And it sort of depends where you're going. I know in the United States, like I said, there's some that have been going up until Canada's got them till 1980. Yeah, 1998. I'm sorry, was the last one that was closed. Well, the traditional boarding school, I should say. The United States still has different schools that are ran by different churches and stuff that are still going on. One of the things that they've done with a lot of the tribes now is start teaching vocations in schools upon the reservations. That actually started back in the 1940s up through the 1960s with the Dene, when they went down there mining for uranium. And they found out that they poisoned, because they hit a uranium mine, it actually bled into the water systems and made a lot of the children and stuff sick. So there's a lot of different schools depending on their history and stuff like that. But a lot of the tribes now, different areas again, that will go to a school on their territory for a certain age, and then about middle school, and then they can go to vocational school or go to high school. There's quite a few of the high schools that are off the reservations and stuff like that, or out of their territories. So like our people, we've been teaching and doing school systems in-house, where we're teaching a lot of our children the different academics in their own language. There's a lot of online resources and stuff that they've started doing as media has started to grow, and we've gotten access to technology. The Teton of Santisu out through Nebraska did something kind of novel. This was years ago. One of the things that they did was they had 3 casinos, 3 bingo halls. One was a bingo hall, and they had 2 casinos that were early on, they got the rights to do on the reservation. What they did was then they turned the one bingo or the one casino into a vocational school, where they actually taught things like first aid and nursing. They used the second one into a vocational school to teach trade jobs. The third one that they had is now funding those 2. So now you can actually go through school, learn everything in your own language. A friend of mine, Roger Buchholz, he was a U.S. U.S. Air Force pilot, and he left the reservation, went through school, joined the Army Corps of Engineers, and brought all that ingenuity and thought process of everything he learned through the U.S. military back to his reserve, and to try to help change the mindset of a lot of his own people. And he was pretty successful. He had a very, very difficult upbringing, but he, used that to his betterment. So, like I said, there's, you can research, there's a lot to go through with that. There's a lot of different areas, a lot of the schools and stuff, and when they were open, when they were closed, why they were closed, how long the process went.
In the US, can correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, there were private ones that started before the 1850s in the US. The first government-sponsored one was the Carlisle School, and that was used as a model across the United States for others to follow. And that ran from, roughly the government-sponsored school was roughly, very roughly the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s.
Yeah.
And if these schools were originally open to forced assimilation of the people, was it just under the guise of a school, or did they actually get an education and then the students moved through and eventually graduated?
There was, and that's one thing that the other side of this whole thing. I mean, there is traumatic stories that have happened, of course. And they were under the guise of giving a formal education. You got to learn, English, math, science, different things like that. So it wasn't all like, going to a prison camp or something like that. But, it certainly had its moments depending on the guys. And there were very strict rules and structures under a process of fear that a lot of these kids, who attended there definitely dealt with. But they did learn a lot of the basic things that you would learn in a general school. And again, depending on the area of the school, of what they were learning about, and the other teachers that came into, to help with the process of that, of whether it was math, science, English, literature, poetry, things like that, music, art. There's a lot of those schools that turned into, and I think in the exhibit they actually have some great pictures of that, of some of them that did marching bands and just a whole bunch of really cool stuff that they did. Well, I call it cool because it was definitely based off of the general school system that was there. A lot of the schools that were formed in the educational process was in its originally was formed to basically be promoting you, working you through to learn all the basics for factory jobs, because at the time in the United States and different parts of the country, they figured that was the main thing, is you get a workforce going, you give them the basic tools and stuff of what they need, and they can get a job anywhere. And as we've seen, certain aspects of that educational system have been upgraded and have been changed. Even today, there's debate, especially with COVID, is the current school environment the best environment? Are we approaching it from the best avenue? Is the structure that we're doing the best mindset for the kids? So,
And
Thank you.
Christine, that
Casey, one
question.
more question from
Yeah.
Ella. We'll take one more question. Ella, go ahead.
Okay. Two different points, and then let you respond, Frank. Deb Haaland is the Secretary of Interior, and I'm hoping that the high level she's been appointed to will
Yes.
also bring knowledge to people, because I remember reading where she says she is the 34th generation of her people. I think she's Laguna Pueblo.
Yes.
And that was very, very startling to me, even though I've lived in New Mexico and I've been around some of the Pueblos, and more Chicano than Indian, but still. I was very startled by 34 generations. That gives a whole different view of the European arrival here. And then, so I'm hoping that Secretary Haaland will kind of raise people's awareness.
Right.
And I see where she's also starting an investigation into the boarding schools, the Indian boarding schools, as of last month, basically. And another comment, when I lived in New Mexico, I knew people who worked for the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, for those of you who don't know government speak. And one of the women I knew taught a BIA school at Lucachucay on the Navajo res.
Yeah.
That's a different point of view, or is it not, from the boarding schools, because she was on the res teaching the kids.
Well, and again, this sort of depends on the environment and the territory that you lived in. So the Bureau of Indian Affairs was, again, they were the subsidies, they were the government schools and stuff that a lot of the kids went to. So one of the things that they did try to do is provide, under their treaties, which they broke pretty much every single one, but under the treaties, they wanted to make sure that they provided whatever the system that they were trying to put in place, whether it was academics, healthcare, things like that. That's what the Bureau of Indian Affairs was based off of. So a lot of the people that were internal of the nation that they would bring up to the level of education that they needed to teach in the school, whether it was elementary school and so on and so forth, they did try to look at a lot of the people within the tribe to do so. Some of them did very, very well with it. Some of them struggled with it. Some of the Indian Affairs schools had individuals that were brought up to, become part of that. Let's really make sure that they have to very much rely on the government system here, so that they understand we're here to help. We're here to do X, Y, and Z. Some territories did somewhat successful with that. The Oklahoma territory that was originally supposed to be Indian country, they realized, well, if we keep putting all these tribes in one state, they may revolt and come back on us. So we need to start spreading them out throughout the country. But yeah, some of them, like, I've met some great teachers that went through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and that were teaching there. And I know one of the things that they said was the actual resources that they had. They get a curriculum, but they just don't get the standardized things that they really need to do to push these kids to that next level. It's very basic stuff, but they try to interject as much cultural reinforcement as they're allowed to within their classroom environment, depending on what the curriculum is. And again, like I said earlier, that there's a big part of the other side of this, where those that survived the tribal schools and stuff, they did, let's say, some of them that I know that survived a lot of that. They had their, yeah, I mean, there's some, I mean, when we did, like I said, the hidden from history aspect of it, there were some that were completely ignorant to what was going on around them, because they were just focused in on, the environments and stuff that they were doing. So, so they, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, the things that a lot of our tribes have dealt with, you have individuals that really try to make sense of reclaiming their heritage and their culture in some way. They try to make better of the worst environment. You have some, like I said, that try to, take the different things that they're given and they run from it. And then you have some that take what they're given, they run from it, they come home to try to make it better. And that's what a lot of these environments, have tried to do. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, like I said, they're sort of the systematic health system for a lot of our tribes here in the lower 48s. Indian Health Agency and things like that. And the more individuals from our own nations and from our own tribes that get involved in it, we find different ways to sort of tweak it and take it to the next level, to find different ways to say, let's reconnect and really improve a system, because the best way to fix anything is to fix it from the inside out. And that's one of the main goals that I think is a takeaway from all of this is, we're not going to fix the problem looking in. We have to get involved in it. We have to push through it. We have to sometimes swallow our own pride and make that change by being part of the process and part of the solution, not just turning a blind eye to it and saying, let's close the chapter on that and move on to the next.
Okay. One more question in the chat from Elaine. I think you might have covered this, but just to clarify, Elaine Sparkle said she taught at a BIA boarding school in Tuba City, Arizona in the 80s, but rather than trying to eliminate ceremonies and customs, they were celebrated.
Right.
When did that change take place? I think you mentioned it about the 1970s. If you could just clarify that.
So yeah, it was, so the Freedom of Religion Act that took place for a lot of the tribes, that was between it went to Congress from the reservations from 1975. If you worked at the Bureau of Indian Affairs school, if you worked on the reservations and stuff, a lot of them that did try to celebrate their powwows and stuff like that, a lot of them, there was Congress, the American Indian movement was really pushing for this aspect all the way up to from the 1960s all the way up through the 1970s. And then in 1979 is when it was officially passed, to where we were recognized for having a freedom of religion. That was also around the same time that over in Oklahoma, we started what was considered to be the Native American Church, that a lot of the northern tribes are not for. The Native American Church, the reason for that was because, and why it was turned down originally, was because it was spirituality. It wasn't considered an organized faith, and to be put on the rolls as an organized faith, you had to have some sort of doctrine written out in the process. And that's what they eventually went through to do, to form the book that had the peyote ceremony and the water bird and things like that. That was actually put, and that was what was presented, and that's why it got passed. It's kind of interesting, the fact that it got called the Freedom of Religion Act. Even still today, like in the BSA, Boy Scouts of America and the Girl Scouts of America. So they utilize a lot of things from our culture. They have religious pins that you can earn from any different religion, from Buddhism through you name it. Basically, if it has a book and it's written out, they'll have a pin and a word for it. They utilize Native American recognition in their Order of the Arrow, which is the National Honor Society for all the scouts that go over and beyond in recognition. Yet they don't have any device or pin that recognizes them in that regard. So if you're Indigenous, you basically, and I actually had to take this to the national office. If you're Indigenous, you don't get that extra little, that device and stuff, because they don't, and they basically say, well, there's nothing really you can have, so you can just wear whatever you want. On the reservations, there is actually chapters of scouting that they've formed on the reservations that actually teach everything through their culture. They have a fairly unique program, almost like how the LDS Church also has a separate program, like the Young Men's Society, the Young Women's Society, that they do. So it's kind of like, if you can't find it, you got to make it up on your own. You got to push through it, or by chance, you can kind of ride the coattails from somebody else who did it before you, and then branch off to do your own unique thing. So, and make that outstanding.
In
Yeah.
small museums, we do the same thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. So,
Kim, did you have any last thoughts to add before we wrap up here?
Sure. We're just thrilled that everyone took time out of their day. I hope it sends us all into our weekend and next week, just kind of in a, it re-tills the soil of the mental spirit garden there to keep us all moving forward in good directions. Thank you again for hosting the Everhart Museum, and thank you, Frank, for joining us. Frank's one of our folk and traditional artists at the Everhart Museum, so you'll be seeing programs with him throughout the coming months and years. And really do try to come before this exhibit closes. It's nationally important right now, especially. It's been important every single moment since it began, but right now its national importance cannot be understated. And to be able to educate ourselves on this story as we are the continuing heritage, it is up to us, as Frank said, how we take our next steps. And this is how we can help, is by going to see and study this. So please.
What are your days and hours?
I think go to everhart-museum.org, because if there are any changes with COVID, if anything happens, it's always just best to go there to check their current hours of opening. So.
Okay,